High in the alpine forests of Colorado, where the mountains rise like silent giants and the trees block out the sky. Simple wooden cabins. Emergency huts buried beneath snow. Mountain shelters meant to protect lost hikers from the cold. But when night falls in the Rockies, the forest changes. Wind screams through pine branches like distant voices. Footsteps echo where no trails exist. And the shelters meant to keep people alive become places no one wants to stay until morning. Search and rescue teams whisper about shelters found unlocked from the inside. Blankets neatly folded. Food untouched. And signs of panic carved into the walls. Some hikers report hearing knocking on shelter doors long after midnight. Others see lights flickering deep in the trees. And some who enter these alpine shelters claim they were not alone. Tonight, we venture into the high-elevation forests of Colorado. Into shelters hidden beneath snow and shadow. Places where the trees watch. The wind listens. And something else waits just beyond the firelight. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. Because what we are about to explore exists far above city lights, far beyond comfort, and deep within some of the most isolated wilderness in America. The alpine forests of Colorado are breathtaking by day. Endless evergreens. Frozen streams. Snow-capped peaks stretching into the clouds. But at night, these forests feel ancient. Sound travels strangely. Distances lie. And isolation presses heavily on the mind. Over the years, hikers, climbers, and rangers have shared chilling stories about mountain shelters scattered throughout the Rockies. They speak of voices calling from outside during blizzards. Of shadows moving between trees when no animals are present. Of shelters that feel warm when they should be frozen. Some believe these shelters sit on land long avoided. Others say the mountains themselves do not welcome visitors. Before we continue, let me ask you something. If you were trapped overnight in a remote alpine forest shelter, and you heard slow footsteps circling outside while the snow fell harder, would you open the door to Loka or would you stay silent and hope whatever was out there went away? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And let us step carefully into the most haunted alpine forest shelters in Colorado. Frostpine Shelter sits deep within a dense evergreen forest where tall trees crowd together and block most of the sky. The shelter was built decades ago as a simple refuge for hikers and rangers. Thick wooden walls, small windows, and a low roof designed to hold warmth. By day, it feels sturdy and practical. Light filters in softly through narrow panes, diffused by branches and needles outside. Night changes the shelter completely. As darkness settles over the forest, the temperature inside Frostpine Shelter drops suddenly. It happens quickly, often within minutes. Campers describe the chill as sharp and immediate, as if warmth is pulled out of the air rather than lost gradually. Breath becomes visible indoors. Metal gear grows painfully cold to the touch. This drop does not match conditions outside. The forest remains cold but stable, while the interior temperature continues to fall, sometimes reaching levels that force visitors to layer clothing meant for extreme weather. Heating attempts offer little relief. Fires burn in designated stoves, yet the warmth does not spread as expected. Heat gathers close to the flame but fades only a few steps away. Blankets feel thin. Sleeping bags lose effectiveness. The cold presses inward, persistent and focused. Along with the cold come the voices. Visitors hear whispering voices coming from the walls. The sound is soft and constant, never loud enough to startle, but impossible to ignore. It resembles hushed conversation, layered and overlapping, as if many voices are speaking quietly at once. Listeners cannot identify words or phrases. The sound carries rhythm and intention without meaning. Those who investigate find nothing. Pressing an ear against the wood reveals only the same murmuring, no louder or clearer. Stepping outside brings sudden silence. The moment the door closes again, the whispers return, unchanged and patient. Sleep becomes difficult. The cold wakes people repeatedly through the night. Dreams are shallow and fragmented. Many report the sense of being observed without direction, as if attention fills the room without a source. Some wake to find frost handprints on the windows from the inside. The glass beneath is untouched. The patterns are unmistakable. 5 distinct fingers, pressed flat against the glass. Sometimes more than one print appears, overlapping slightly, as if multiple hands rested there at the same time. The frost forms from within the shelter, not from the forest air outside. No residue remains once the frost melts. No moisture streaks. No marks that explain the shape. Only memory and photographs taken quickly before the sun rises and the cold releases its hold. These handprints do not appear every night. They are reported most often during long stays, when visitors remain inside after sunset rather than leaving at dusk. Solo travelers experience them more frequently than groups, though no one is exempt. Rangers are aware of the reports. Equipment behaves oddly inside frostpine shelter. Batteries drain faster than expected. Screens fog despite low humidity. Watches stop briefly, then resume with incorrect time. These disruptions are minor but consistent, adding to the sense that the shelter does not behave like other structures in the forest. The walls themselves feel different at night. Touching them produces a faint vibration, not enough to be heard, but enough to be felt through fingertips. The wood feels denser, colder, as if layered with something unseen beneath the surface. Those who stay long enough begin to notice patterns. The whispers grow more active during the coldest moments of the night. They soften as dawn approaches, fading gradually until they disappear entirely once sunlight reaches the shelter. The temperature rises just as suddenly as it fell, returning the interior to normal conditions within minutes. By morning, frostpine shelter feels ordinary again. The forest resumes its quiet life. Birds move through the branches. Light fills the room. The windows are clear. The air is still cold, but manageable, no different from the shade outside. Some visitors leave immediately after sunrise. Others linger, walking the perimeter, examining the walls, searching for signs they might have imagined the night. Most find nothing unusual. The shelter offers no clues, no visible damage, no alterations. Those who return later often hesitate. They remember the cold, the voices, the frost shaped like hands. Some describe a lingering sensitivity to temperature afterward, feeling cold more deeply for days. Others report hearing faint whispers in quiet indoor spaces long after leaving the forest, though the sound fades over time. According to these accounts, the trees there have grown close together for centuries, trapping winter between their roots and branches. Some believe the shelter was built in the wrong place. They say it interrupted something that prefers darkness and cold. Others believe it simply provided a shape for something already present to interact with, walls to carry sound, windows to hold frost. No injuries have been officially recorded at Frostpine Shelter. No one has disappeared. No one has been physically harmed. This makes it easier to keep the shelter open and dismiss concerns as discomfort rather than danger. Yet usage has declined. Hikers choose other routes. Rangers rotate duties quickly. The shelter remains available, maintained, stocked with basic supplies, waiting quietly among the trees. At night, the forest grows dense and still. The shelter stands dark beneath the pines, absorbing cold. The walls listen. The windows gather frost when conditions allow. The whispers move through the structure, soft and continuous. Until dawn returns. And releases the forest from its grip. Frostpine shelter does not chase or trap. It simply changes. Those who pass through during the day may never notice anything unusual. Those who stay through the night carry the experience with them. A memory of sudden cold, quiet voices, and frost shaped like hands pressed gently against the glass from the inside. The shelter remains where it is, deep in evergreen shade, offering refuge by day. The hut stands just below the tree line, where the forest thins and the mountain begins to assert itself. Timberline Watch Hut was built as a shelter for climbers caught by sudden weather, a simple structure anchored into rock and soil. From a distance it looks small and exposed, pressed against the slope as if trying not to be noticed. Wind is constant here. It sweeps down from higher elevations without obstruction, striking the hut from all sides. The walls creak. The metal fittings vibrate. Snow and ice scrape across the roof even on clear nights. Those who stay inside quickly learn the difference between normal mountain sounds and something else. Climbers often arrive near dusk, tired and focused on rest. They check the interior, secure their gear, and wait out the night. As daylight fades, the wind intensifies, pushing hard enough to make conversation difficult. The hut feels alive in those hours, responding to every gust with groans and rattles. The footsteps begin after full darkness. At first they are easy to dismiss. A shifting panel. Loose ice sliding across the roof. A stronger gust pressing debris against the metal. But the sound settles into a pattern that does not match the weather. Slow steps. Evenly spaced. Moving from one end of the roof to the other. The rhythm is deliberate, heavy enough to feel through the beams. Climbers pause mid-sentence, listening. The rhythm is deliberate, heavy enough to feel through the beams. Those inside often assume another climber has arrived late. They call out. No response comes back. The wind carries their voices away, scattering the sound across the slope. Eventually someone checks. They call out. No response comes back. The wind carries their voices away, scattering the sound across the slope. Bundled against the cold, a climber opens the door and steps outside, scanning the roofline and surrounding ground. Headlamps cut narrow paths through darkness. Nothing moves. No tracks circle the hut. No figure stands nearby. The roof is empty. When the door closes, the footsteps return. They do not rush. They do not retreat. They continue their steady pacing, sometimes pausing directly above the center of the hut, as if standing still to listen. The sound never grows louder, never grows closer, yet it refuses to fade. Inside, the atmosphere shifts. Conversations become quieter. Movements slow. The wind remains present, but it is no longer the dominant sound. The footsteps persist for hours. Climbers report that the pacing changes over time. Early in the night, the steps follow straight lines. Later, they circle. Sometimes they stop directly above where people sleep. Lingering long enough to make rest impossible. No pressure dents the roof. No snow slides free. The sound exists without physical consequence. Attempts to ignore it rarely succeed. Earplugs dull the noise but do not remove it. The vibration carries through the structure, subtle but constant. Sleep comes only in fragments, interrupted by the sense of being watched from above. Weather instruments placed near the hut record nothing unusual during these nights. Wind speed remains steady. Temperature holds. No seismic activity is detected. There is no recorded explanation for rhythmic impacts that leave no mark. Those who climb out again to check, sometimes multiple times in one night, always find the same result. Empty roof. Empty slope. Silence that feels staged, waiting. The most unsettling detail comes from timing. The footsteps always stop at sunrise. As the first light reaches the hut, the pacing slows. Steps become farther apart. The sound fades not abruptly, but respectfully, as if concluding a routine. By the time the sun fully clears the ridge, the roof is quiet. Morning inspections reveal nothing. No new damage. No displaced snow. No sign that anything has stood where the sound clearly existed. The hut returns to being what it was built to be, a shelter against wind and cold. Climbers descend later that day with stories they struggle to share. In daylight, the experience feels distant, unreal. The mountain looks unchanged. The hut seems harmless. Some return months later and hear nothing. Others experience the footsteps again on their very next visit. There is no pattern to predict which nights will bring the sound. Local guides speak about the hut carefully. They do not discourage its use, but they warn newcomers to expect a restless night. They say the mountain is active there, not in movement, but in presence. The hut sits at a boundary where conditions change quickly, where the forest ends and exposure begins. Older accounts mention a watchman once assigned to the area, tasked with monitoring weather conditions before modern forecasting existed. He stayed through long winters, alone, listening to the mountain. Records say he left the post eventually, though the reason is not noted. Whether that story holds truth is unclear. What remains is the sound itself. Timberline Watch Hut still stands, enduring wind, snow, and silence. Climbers continue to use it, grateful for its shelter. Many nights pass without incident. Others stretch long and sleepless, marked by the steady pacing overhead. The mountain does not explain itself. It does not answer questions or respond to inspection. It simply allows certain sounds to exist and others to fade. When morning comes, the footsteps are gone, and the hut waits quietly, as if nothing walked across its roof at all. Black spruce shelter stands alone in a stretch of northern forest where the trees grow dense and tall, their dark needles absorbing what little light reaches the ground. The shelter was built as a simple refuge for hikers, a place to rest and wait out bad weather. From a distance it looks sturdy and practical, a small structure of timber and stone set among the trees. What surrounds it is harder to explain. The forest near the shelter is unnaturally quiet. Not just calm, but empty of sound. No birds call from the branches. No insects hum in the air. Even wind moving through the spruce needles seems muted, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. Visitors often notice the silence before they reach the shelter. The farther they walk, the more sound drains away. Footsteps feel too loud. Breathing becomes noticeable. Some describe an urge to speak softly, though there is no clear reason to do so. The shelter sits in a small clearing, just large enough to allow a view of the surrounding tree line. During the day, sunlight filters through the branches in thin, pale lines. At night, darkness settles quickly, pooling between the trunks and stretching inward toward the open space. Those who stay only briefly often dismiss the quiet as coincidence. They rest, eat, and move on. It is those who remain overnight who report the deeper unease. As evening approaches, the silence grows heavier. The absence of wildlife becomes impossible to ignore. No rustling in the underbrush. No distant calls. The forest feels paused, as if time has slowed around the shelter while continuing normally elsewhere. Inside, the structure offers basic protection. The walls block the wind, but they do little to soften the feeling that something outside is paying close attention. Many report a sense of being observed, not from a single point, but from everywhere beyond the clearing. Nightfall brings the strongest reactions. Light from lanterns or headlamps reaches only a short distance before fading into the dark between the trees. Shadows gather at the edge of vision, just beyond where details can be clearly seen. Looking directly at these shapes offers no clarity. They seem less defined the longer they are studied. Turning away and glancing back sometimes reveals them more clearly, as if they prefer not to be focused on directly. The silence amplifies every small sound inside the shelter. A breath sounds too loud. Dreams come quickly and end abruptly, leaving a lingering awareness of the forest just outside the walls. Several hikers have described waking suddenly with the certainty that something had moved closer. Stepping outside reveals no tracks, no broken branches, no sign of disturbance. The tree line remains unchanged, the shadows still and patient. Morning does not immediately bring relief. Dawn arrives slowly here, light filtered and dulled by thick canopy. Even as visibility improves, the forest remains quiet. Birds do not return. Insects do not resume their work. It is only when travelers leave the clearing and put distance between themselves and the shelter that sound gradually returns. Maintenance crews have visited Black Spruce Shelter many times. They report the same silence, though they attribute it to environmental factors. No official explanation has ever been offered for the absence of wildlife. The area shows no signs of pollution or habitat damage. The forest appears healthy in every measurable way. Older trail maps indicate that the shelter stands near a place once avoided by early travelers. Notes mention a resting point that felt wrong, though no reason was recorded. Paths were rerouted over time, but the clearing remained. Local guides advise hikers to use the shelter only in emergencies. They do not forbid it outright. They simply recommend not staying longer than necessary. And not venturing into the forest at night. Those who follow this advice tend to have uneventful visits. Those who ignore it often leave with stories they struggle to explain. A feeling of being counted. A sense of attention that did not fade until miles down the trail. No one has reported being approached or touched. The shadows never cross into the clearing. Whatever stands beyond the tree line respects the boundary, as long as it is respected in return. Black Spruce Shelter continues to appear on maps and guidebooks. It offers safety from weather and terrain, and in that sense it does its job well. But it is not a place of rest. The forest around it remains watchful and quiet, as if listening for something that never quite happens. And those who spend the night there often leave with the same unshakable impression. The shelter is not abandoned. It is observed. Nestled high in the Sawtooth Range of Idaho stands a solitary structure known as Whisper Peak Cabin. It is not abandoned. Not haunted in the traditional sense. It is maintained by whom remains unclear. The logs are sound. The roof intact. The chimney clean. Supplies are occasionally replenished. Yet few choose to stay the night. And those who do rarely remain until sunrise. The cabin sits just below the tree line on a broad granite shelf. Pines surround it on three sides. To the east a steep drop gives way to a vast alpine basin. The view is serene. Until the wind begins to move. Here the breeze does not whistle through the eaves. It carries voices. Not distant murmurs or indistinct echoes. Clear articulate speech. Names. First names. As if someone just out of sight is calling to a friend. The phenomenon occurs only within 50 yards of the cabin. Step back down the trail and the wind resumes its ordinary sigh through the branches. Step closer and the air fills with sound. Hikers describe it as deeply unsettling yet not frightening at first. The tone is calm. Reassuring almost. But the names are always personal. Not generic. Not random. One woman heard her childhood nickname and used for over 30 years. A park volunteer heard the name of his late brother spoken in a voice he recognized instantly. No one has recorded the voices clearly. Yet multiple independent witnesses confirmed the same experience. The same precision. The same quiet insistence. Most decide to leave before dark. Not because they feel threatened. But because the voices grow more persistent as twilight deepens. They do not repeat names endlessly. They wait. Then speak again. As if patient. As if certain the listener will respond in time. Some report hearing their name followed by a soft inhalation. A pause. As if waiting for acknowledgement. Of those who have stayed overnight, fewer than a dozen in the last 2 decades. Most departed well before dawn. Not in panic but in quiet resolve. They packed their gear silently. Closed the cabin door gently behind them. When asked later, they rarely speak of fear. They speak of weight. Of a presence that did not intrude but occupied. That filled the space between thoughts. One climber wrote in his journal that he did not feel watched. He felt remembered. The cabin's origins are undocumented. Forest Service records list no construction permits. Local historians suggest it may have been built in the 1920s. A survey team that vanished during an early autumn storm. Their equipment was found neatly stored inside the cabin. Their journals left open on the table. The final entry in each reads simply. Almost home. Geologists note that the granite beneath Whisper Peak contains high concentrations of quartz and magnetite. Under certain atmospheric conditions, these minerals can interact with charged particles in the air, creating faint electromagnetic fields. Some researchers theorize these fields might stimulate the auditory cortex in susceptible individuals, producing the sensation of hearing familiar voices. A phenomenon known as geophysical pareidolia. Yet this explanation does not account for why the effect is so localized. Why only certain individuals hear their names. Why animals behave unusually near the site. Trail cameras show deer pausing at the tree line then turning back without entering the clearing. Even insects seem quieter within the cabina's immediate vicinity. Those who return often do so in daylight only. They hike to the ridge. Sit on the sun-warmed porch. Eat lunch in silence. And listen. Not for voices but for the absence of them. A few have left small tokens on the windowsill. A smooth river stone. A pressed wildflower. A note folded neatly. None have been disturbed. None have vanished. They remain exactly as placed. As if the place honors intention even when it does not invite presence. Whisper Peak Cabin does not demand attention. It offers recognition. It does not chase. It waits. And in that waiting lies its mystery. Not a warning but an invitation. To consider what it means to be known. To be called by name in a place where no one should know you are there. Perhaps the wind here does not carry voices from the past. Perhaps it carries questions from the land itself. Gentle. Persistent. And deeply human in its longing to connect. Some places do not echo with sound. They echo with memory. They echo with memory. And on still evenings when the light slants low across the peaks, the wind rises just enough to whisper one more name. High on the windswept shoulder of Mount Perdition, a solitary structure stands against the endless white. It is the Snowvale Emergency Hut, a stout, government-built cabin of logs and steel. To the countless skiers, climbers, and hikers caught in the mountaine's sudden fury, it is a beacon of salvation. Its shelves hold life-saving rations, its stove provides precious heat, and its thick walls defy the screaming gales. This hut has saved many lives. That fact is etched in the logbook, a testament to gratitude and survival. But there is another story written in the margins of that book, a quieter, colder narrative. A pattern that rescue teams whisper about in basecamp lodges. For some who reach the hut, safety is only an illusion. Others vanished nearby. The disappearances follow a strange and specific pattern. They never happen during the initial struggle to reach shelter. They occur later, during the long, tense hours of waiting out the storm. The wind howls like a living thing, and the snow piles in deep, silent drifts against the door and the single window. It is then, when the hut is utterly isolated, that the knocking begins. It starts softly. A gentle tap-tap-tap on the heavy timber door. The sound is too rhythmic, too deliberate. It is a polite, patient knocking. But the sound is too loud to be the wind or ice cracking from the eaves. There are no footprints in the morning light, only smooth, unbroken blankets of white. The accounts in the logbook grow tense when describing this moment. People report feeling a profound sense of wrongness, coupled with a desperate, human hope. The mind fights against the logic of the impassable snow. The knocking persists, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, a maddening counter-rhythm to the storm. The worst part, according to those who have endured the night, is the compulsion. An overwhelming urge to answer, to see. It feels inhuman to ignore a potential plea for help, even as every survival instinct screams to stay put. Many have resisted. They huddle by the stove, waiting for dawn. But not everyone can withstand the psychological pressure. The last words often describe the decision to open the door, just a crack, to call out into the blizzard. What happens next is always the same. Opening the door reveals nothing but darkness. Not the darkness of night, but a deep, absolute blackness. But a deeper, soul-numbing frost. Those who open the door are never seen again. Their gear remains inside, often with a final, hurried log entry. Search parties find the hut empty, the door left ajar. And a smooth expanse of snow stretching out from the threshold with no tracks leading in or out. It is as if they simply stepped into the darkness and were erased. The official explanation is one of tragedy and delirium. Storm survivors, suffering from hypothermia and isolation, can experience profound psychological breaks. They might wander out into the storm, and the snow quickly covers their tracks. The knocking is dismissed as auditory hallucination, a product of extreme stress. This is the rational, documented viewpoint. Yet, the veteran rangers of the Perdition Range add a private warning to their safety briefings. They point to the Huda's construction. The original door, according to blueprints, opened outward. But after the first disappearance, it was changed. The current, reinforced door opens inward. A small, brass deadbolt was also added on the inside. A feature not found on any other emergency shelter in the region. The official reason given was snow load pressure. But the rangers note the bolt is positioned unusually high. As if meant to be out of the reach of something outside. As if meant to be out of the reach of something outside. As if meant to be out of the reach of something outside. The Snow Veil hut continues to serve its purpose. It remains a vital, life-saving refuge. But those who know its full story treat it with a solemn respect. They stock the stove, they eat the rations, and they sign the logbook. But when the storm reaches its peak and the mountainside is buried in an impenetrable white silence, they do not answer the door. They stoke the fire, they turn up the lantern, and they wait, listening to the patient, impossible knocking from a world where no one should be able to walk. Iron Ridge Shelter stands alone along a narrow mountain spine where exposed stone breaks through thin soil. The ridge rises sharply on both sides, leaving the shelter perched above deep slopes scattered with loose rock and scrub. Reaching it requires a steady climb and careful footing, and the air grows thinner the closer you get. By the time the shelter comes into view, the landscape feels stripped down to its essentials: rock, wind, and silence. The shelter was built as a practical refuge for workers and hikers passing through the ridge decades ago. Its frame is heavy timber reinforced with iron brackets and plates. The floorboards are thick and uneven, laid directly over stone supports. During daylight, the structure feels solid and reliable, weathered but strong. Something about Iron Ridge Shelter changes after nightfall. Visitors often notice it first through their equipment. A clean blade left overnight shows orange bloom by morning. Hinges stiffen. Nails darken in hours rather than weeks. The rust forms evenly, not in patches, as if moisture settles where it should not exist. Humidity readings do not explain it. The air inside the shelter remains dry. Condensation does not gather on walls or windows. Wood stays intact. Only metal reacts, aging rapidly without visible cause. Tools carried in from other areas behave normally once removed from the shelter, their corrosion slowing to expected rates. Those who stay overnight begin to hear sounds. Metallic scraping sounds rise from beneath the floorboards, low and deliberate. The noise is not loud enough to startle, but it repeats often enough to draw attention. It resembles iron dragged slowly across stone, steady and controlled rather than chaotic. The sound travels. At times it seems to move from one end of the shelter to the other. Sometimes it pauses directly beneath the center of the room. Other times it fades, only to return minutes later from a different direction. Pressing an ear to the floor makes the sound clearer, though no vibration is visible. Some feel vibrations as if something moves below. The sensation is subtle, more felt than seen. A faint trembling passes through the soles of boots. Cups rattle softly. Loose gear shifts by a fraction of an inch. The shelter does not shake. Walls remain steady. Support beams show no signs of stress. There is no cracking stone or shifting foundation. The vibration feels isolated, contained beneath the floor, limited to a narrow range. Those who investigate find nothing. Lifting floorboards reveals solid stone and packed earth, unchanged and undisturbed. No tunnels. No gaps. No evidence of animals large enough to cause the sensation. The scraping continues even when boards are removed, though it becomes harder to locate. The sound never rises above the floor. Nothing emerges. No shapes or shadows appear. The shelter remains visually unchanged, even as sound and vibration persist beneath it. This consistency unsettles visitors more than sudden events would. Sleep is difficult inside Iron Ridge Shelter. The scraping does not follow a pattern tied to time. It may stop for an hour, then resume suddenly. The vibrations often occur when the shelter is quiet, when attention sharpens and small movements become noticeable. Some visitors report the feeling of weight. They describe the sense that something presses upward from below, not enough to lift the floor, but enough to create resistance when shifting position. The sensation fades when stepping outside, replaced by the steady firmness of exposed rock. Outside, the ridge feels calm. Wind moves freely. Stone remains cold and unmoving. The night sky stretches wide and empty. The night sky stretches wide and empty. The contrast makes returning inside more unsettling, as if the shelter exists in a different state than the land around it. Rangers are aware of the reports. Official explanations cite thermal contraction, metal fatigue, and natural rock movement beneath the structure. These factors account for some noise, but not the speed of corrosion or the consistent vibration pattern. No seismic activity has been recorded during reported events. Equipment behaves strangely overnight. Metal containers feel warmer than expected, while wood remains cold. Compasses lose accuracy briefly, then correct themselves. Tools laid flat sometimes rotate slightly by morning, their orientation changed without clear cause. Long before the shelter was built, the ridge was used as a quarry site. Records show that mining was abandoned abruptly after repeated equipment failures. Some believe the ridge retains movement. They say the iron beneath the shelter never fully settled, that pressure continues to shift slowly, grinding metal against stone in places too deep to see. According to these accounts, the shelter sits directly above a point of friction. Others believe the structure itself is the cause. They suggest the iron reinforcements act as anchors, drawing reactions from the stone below. The shelter becomes part of a process rather than an observer, interacting with forces beneath the ridge. Visitors who stay multiple nights report heightened sensitivity. They notice the scraping sooner each evening. Vibrations feel stronger, though measurements show no change. Some describe a growing unease around metal objects, choosing to store tools outside or leave them behind entirely. No one has been harmed at Iron Ridge Shelter. No collapses have occurred. No injuries have been reported. This makes it easier to keep the shelter open and dismiss concerns as discomfort rather than danger. Still, usage has declined. Hikers choose alternate routes. Rangers limit overnight stays. The shelter remains maintained, its roof repaired, its floorboards secured, its iron fittings replaced more often than expected. Each replacement rusts just as quickly. By morning, the new metal shows the same dull orange bloom, spreading evenly across surfaces. Cleaning slows it only briefly. The process always resumes. At dawn, the ridge feels unchanged. Sunlight warms stone. Wind carries away sound. Inside the shelter, the scraping fades and stops entirely. The vibrations vanish. The metal remains rusted, proof that something occurred during the night. Those who leave carry the memory with them. They remember the sound of metal moving where nothing should move. The feeling of vibration beneath solid ground. The way iron seemed to age in hours instead of years. Iron Ridge Shelter continues to stand where it was built. It offers protection from wind and weather. It holds warmth during the day. It appears stable and reliable to anyone passing through briefly. At night, something beneath it stirs. The ridge settles, shifts, or grinds in ways not fully understood. Metal responds. Wood listens. The shelter remains still, holding its place above whatever moves below. Iron Ridge Shelter does not announce itself. It does not warn or threaten. It simply reacts. Those who stay long enough feel it, hear it, and leave knowing that the ground beneath the ridge is not as quiet as it seems. Cold Hollow Cabin rests in a shallow valley where sunlight struggles to linger. During the day, the place feels muted and chilled, even in warmer seasons. Shadows cling to the ground. The air stays cool, carrying the smell of damp wood and earth. Visitors often remark that the cold feels heavier there, as if it settles rather than moves. At night, that changes. As the sun drops behind the surrounding ridges, warmth begins to gather inside the cabin. It is subtle at first. A soft easing of the air. Breath no longer fogs as quickly. The inhabitants assume the structure is simply holding heat better after sunset. But no heat source has been used. Cold Hollow Cabin was built decades ago as a seasonal shelter for forestry workers. It is simple, with thick logs, a stone fireplace, and narrow windows placed to withstand winter winds. The chimney is old. The flue sticks. Smoke can back up without warning. Most choose to rely on layered clothing and lanterns instead. That decision is sometimes taken out of their hands. Those staying overnight describe the first sign as a faint glow. A soft orange flicker reflected on the stonework. When they look directly at the fireplace, flames are already present, steady and controlled, as if burning for some time. No one remembers striking a match. No sound precedes the fire's appearance. Wood stacked nearby remains untouched. No one remembers striking a match. No crackle of kindling starting. The fire simply exists. The warmth spreads quickly, filling the cabin in a way that feels deliberate. Despite the warmth, unease settles in. Those inside feel a sudden drain of energy. Limbs grow heavy. Sitting feels necessary. Standing becomes an effort. The warmth should be comforting, yet it presses down instead. Encouraging stillness. Fear follows close behind. It arrives without a clear cause. No noise triggers it. No movement draws attention. Something is wrong. Hearts beat faster. Thoughts scatter. People glance at doorways and windows. No movement draws attention. Something is wrong. Some attempt to leave the cabin for fresh air. Opening the door brings a rush of cold that feels shocking compared to the warmth inside. Stepping out clears the head slightly, but exhaustion lingers, clinging like weight tied to the body. After a few minutes, most return indoors, drawn back despite instinct. Once the door closes, the warmth settles again. Those who stay awake through the night describe waves of drowsiness that feel unnatural. Eyes close without permission. Thoughts slip away mid-sentence. Sleep comes in short, fragmented moments filled with vivid impressions rather than dreams. A sense of being watched lingers even when no one is moving. The fire never spreads. It never consumes more fuel than it should. By morning, it fades quietly, leaving behind cool stone and a fireplace filled with ash that was not there before. Daylight restores the cabin to its colder state. The warmth vanishes as if it never existed. Exhaustion lifts gradually, replaced by confusion and lingering unease. People struggle to recall exact details of the night. Events blur together, leaving impressions rather than clear memories. Those who return during daylight hours often doubt their experience. The cabin feels inert. Cold. Ordinary. The hearth is empty. It is easy to convince oneself that the night was misremembered. Until it happens again. Local records mention Cold Hollow Cabin only briefly. Maintenance logs note unusual temperature fluctuations that do not align with weather patterns. Inspectors find no faults with the structure that could explain the warmth. No evidence of faulty wiring exists. No hidden heat source is discovered. Stories circulate quietly among nearby communities. They do not frame the cabin as dangerous, only demanding. The advice is simple. Do not stay too long. Do not sleep deeply. If the fire appears, acknowledge it but do not rely on it. Some believe the cabin retains echoes of those who once depended on it for survival. Others think the hollow itself traps warmth and emotion, releasing both when darkness settles. No explanation accounts for the shared sensations of fear and fatigue, or the way they arrive together. The cabin remains available for use. Hikers and travelers still find shelter there when weather turns suddenly. Many nights pass without incident. The fireplace stays cold. The air remains sharp. On other nights, warmth gathers again after sunset. Those who experience it rarely speak loudly about it. The story feels fragile, as if telling it too clearly might invite the experience back. They simply say the cabin feels different at night, and leave it at that. Cold Hollow Cabin stands unchanged, waiting quietly in its valley. During the day, it feels empty and cold, a place abandoned by comfort. When night arrives, warmth fills the space without invitation, and those inside are reminded that shelter does not always come without cost. By morning, the cold returns, the fire is gone, and the hollow keeps its silence, as if nothing unusual ever happened at all. Pine Warden Shelter sits high along an old forest route where the land rises steadily into thicker trees and colder air. It was built decades ago as a seasonal refuge for rangers, hunters, and hikers moving through long stretches of wilderness. The structure is simple and sturdy, positioned where several narrow trails quietly converge before continuing uphill into denser growth. The shelter itself feels ordinary. Weathered wood, a slanted roof, a small interior meant to block wind and rain. What draws attention is not the building, but the forest around it. Tall pines surround the clearing, their trunks straight and closely spaced, their branches forming a canopy that filters light into muted tones even at midday. Old ranger logs stored in regional archives make repeated reference to unexplained lights in this area. The entries are brief and careful, written without alarm. Mentions of lantern glows seen between the trees. Notes about movement uphill at night where no paths officially exist. Each mention ends the same way, with no conclusion offered. Modern visitors encounter the forest first as unusually calm. Not silent, but restrained. Sounds feel distant and softened, as though absorbed by the trees. Footsteps do not echo. Voices do not carry far. The forest seems to keep everything close. The lights are most often seen after sunset. They appear as small, warm glows drifting between tree trunks, never touching the ground. They resemble old lanterns in color and intensity, though no metal frame or flame is visible. Just light, suspended and steady. Those who notice the lights at a distance often assume another hiker is moving through the trees. That assumption fades quickly. The glows move uphill along slopes too steep for casual travel. They pass through underbrush without disturbance. There are no sounds of movement, no snapping branches, no footsteps. Visitors who remain near the shelter tend to watch the lights from afar. From that distance, the experience feels strange but manageable. The sense of invitation begins quietly. A thought that it might be worth getting a closer look. A belief that the lights will reveal their source just beyond the next rise. The path uphill appears clearer than expected. As if the forest is opening in subtle ways. Those who follow describe the same pattern. The light never retreats, but it never allows itself to be reached. It maintains a careful distance, leading steadily upward, deeper into the forest. The shelter disappears from view sooner than expected. The slope grows steeper. Familiar landmarks fade. Time becomes difficult to judge. Minutes stretch. The forest looks similar in every direction, yet the light always remains ahead, marking a direction that feels certain even when orientation is lost. Several hikers have reported the unsettling realization that they no longer remember deciding to follow the light. The choice feels retroactive, as if made on their behalf. Turning back requires effort, not physically, but mentally, like resisting a strong current. Those who do stop and turn around describe an immediate change. The light dims or drifts sideways, losing its clear forward path. The forest seems to close in slightly, branches overlapping where they appeared open before. Finding the trail back becomes difficult, but not impossible. Search records show that people who follow the lights for extended periods are often found farther uphill than expected, sometimes miles beyond marked routes. They are usually unharmed, but disoriented, unable to clearly explain why they kept moving. Rangers familiar with Pine Warden Shelter avoid night patrols in the surrounding area. They speak of the lights with caution, not fear. According to them, the lights are not malicious. They are persistent. They guide without force, relying on curiosity and quiet confidence. One retired ranger described seeing multiple lights at once, spaced evenly up the slope like markers on an invisible trail. He said the forest felt organized in that moment, purposeful, as if following an older design layered beneath the present landscape. Historical notes suggest the area once served as a boundary rather than a destination. Early routes avoided climbing too high at night. Travelers stopped at the shelter and waited for daylight before continuing uphill. The reason for this caution was never clearly recorded. Modern equipment offers little clarity. Cameras struggle to capture the lights clearly. Footage often shows faint glows that blur or fade when reviewed. Audio recordings reveal nothing unusual. GPS devices show steady movement uphill, but do not explain the motivation behind it. Those who remain overnight at Pine Warden Shelter sometimes see the lights circling the clearing, staying just beyond the tree line. They do not approach the structure. They do not cross into the open space. They wait at the edge, as if respecting a boundary. Sleep in the shelter is often restless. Dreams are vivid and directional, filled with the sensation of climbing, of following narrow paths through tall trees. Many wake with the urge to continue uphill, even in daylight. By morning, the forest feels ordinary again. Light filters through branches. Trails look familiar. The sense of pull fades, leaving behind only questions and fragmented impressions. Pine Warden Shelter remains in use, marked on maps and recommended for its location and reliability. Yet experienced hikers share quiet advice. If lantern glows appear in the trees after dark, do not follow them. Stay where you are. Let the forest pass through its moment. Because the lights always lead uphill. And not everything that guides you forward is meant to be reached. Deep in the high alpine forests of western Montana stands a small timber structure known as Elk Shadow Hut. It is modest in design. A simple A-frame built decades ago by a now disbanded conservation group. The roof is sound. The foundation stable. Yet despite its remote beauty few choose to stay overnight. Not because of hardship. But because of what happens after dark. The hut sits in a shallow basin ringed by old-growth lodgepole and spruce. A quiet refuge for hikers and researchers. But approach on foot and a subtle change becomes apparent. A quiet refuge for hikers and researchers. But approach on foot and a subtle change becomes apparent. But approach on foot and a subtle change becomes apparent. The forest grows quieter. And then the most telling sign. No elk. None. Not in the meadow beyond. Not in the tree line. Not even tracks in soft earth near water sources. This is unusual. Elk are abundant throughout the region. They graze in clearings at dawn. They bed down in dense cover. Yet within a half-mile radius of Elk Shadow Hut they are entirely absent. As if the land itself has drawn a boundary they will not cross. Those who spend the night report the same sequence of events. After sunset the air cools rapidly. The wind dies. And then it begins. A deep rhythmic breathing. Not ragged. Not labored. Steady. Like the inhalations of a large animal at rest. Yet the sound does not come from one place. It circles the hut, slowly and methodically. Always at a consistent distancia about 30 feet from the walls. Never speeding up. Never stopping. Just circling. One full rotation every 7 to 9 minutes. All night. Until first light. No one has seen the source. Motion-activated cameras have captured only swaying branches and drifting mist. Yet the sound is undeniable. Physical almost. It syncs unintentionally with the listener's own breath until they catch themselves holding it. Some describe it as calming at first. Primal. Reassuring in its constancy. But as the hours pass, the repetition becomes inescapable. A presence defined not by threat but by persistence. Park rangers who have stayed for observation missions note that the breathing changes subtly with the weather. On clear nights it is dry and resonant. Before snow it grows deeper, more resonant, as if the air itself thickens. During high wind the sound does not fade. One biologist recorded over 20 hours of audio. Spectral analysis revealed a complex waveform, a part organic, part harmonica. Consistent with large mammalian respiration, yet layered with low-frequency tones that match no known species. Local stories offer quiet context. Tribal elders speak of the mountain sleeper, a concept not of monster but of guardian. A spirit said to dwell in places where the land holds old wounds or deep peace. It does not speak. It does not act. It simply remains. Breathing. Watching. Waiting. Settlers in the early 1900s avoided the basin entirely. Their journals refer to it as the Still Hollow. Not out of fear but out of respect. They left offerings of salt and pine boughs at the tree line. Not to appease, but to acknowledge. Modern visitors often prepare carefully. They check weather. Pack extra fuel. Bring backup lights. Yet many still leave before dawn. Not in panic. In quiet decision. They extinguish the stove. Roll their sleeping bags. Step outside just as the first gray light touches the peaks. And in that moment the breathing stops. Instantly. Not fading. Not retreating. Just ceasing. As if the night had been a single held breath finally released. No one has been harmed at Elk Shadow Hut. No property damaged. No signs of intrusion. The mystery lies not in danger but in companionship. In the strange comfort of being kept company by something ancient and immense that asks for nothing but space and time. Perhaps the elk avoid the area not because they fear what lives there, but because they recognize it. And know some presences are not meant to be shared. Only honored from afar. The hut remains. The circle continues. And each night the breathing begins again. Steady. Patient. As if the mountain itself has settled in for a long watch. Some places do not hide secrets. They hold vigils. And in the high quiet of the northern Rockies, Elk Shadow Hut stands at the center of one that has lasted longer than memory. High in the Crown Range, where the air is thin and the silence is profound, sits the Glacier Run Shelter. It is a simple, stone and timber structure built for glacial researchers and experienced mountaineers. Perched on a rocky outcrop, it overlooks the vast, frozen river of the Ethelstan ice flow. The shelter offers a stark refuge from the elements, a place to take readings, rest, and wait out sudden squalls. But the scientists who use it most frequently speak of anomalies, subtle disturbances in the natural order that defy their instruments and their understanding. The first and most documented anomaly concerns water. Meltwater streams are the voice of a glacier, chattering with runoff from the summer sun. Near the shelter, however, one particular stream behaves impossibly. On a gentle slope behind the structure, where the geography clearly dictates a downward flow towards the valley, the water does the opposite. It is not an optical illusion. Placed leaves, scientific dyes, and even lightweight measuring buoys are carried slowly, persistently, against gravity. The water trickles over pebbles and gravel, ascending perhaps 20 yards before disappearing into a fissure in the rock face. Geologists have surveyed the area repeatedly. They find no magnetic anomaly, no hidden thermal vent, no slope mismeasurement. The water simply goes up. Along with this physical defiance comes an auditory phenomenon. Visitors to the shelter, especially those who stay overnight, report hearing distant cracking sounds like breaking ice. This is not unusual on a glacier, which creaks and groans as it moves. But these sounds are different. They are sharp, crisp, and localized, seeming to originate just outside the shelter, or sometimes from directly beneath the stone floor. Yet, morning inspections reveal no new fissures, no collapsed seracs, no evidence of any recent fracture in the immediate area. The sounds feel deliberate, like the settling of a vast, frozen architecture. Like something testing its confines. The third occurrence is the most intimate, and the most unsettling. In the harsh environment, proper gear is a matter of life and death. Every visitor is meticulous, arranging their equipment with care. The shelter has a small, designated vestibule for wet gear. Yet, on multiple occasions, individuals and teams have awoken to find their boots moved. Not scattered, not missing. Simply relocated. They are found neatly placed, laces tucked, positioned closer to the door. Sometimes they are aligned perfectly on the threshold, as if waiting for their owner to depart. This happens even when the shelter is locked from the inside, with no evidence of human or animal intrusion. One climatologist, Dr. Alina Vance, spent a solitary week at Glacier Run gathering data. In her official report, she noted the uphill stream as a curious hydrological puzzle. But in a personal journal, later shared discreetly with colleagues, she described the nights. The sharp, syncopated cracking sounds that seemed to answer each other from different points on the ice. And the morning she found her heavy mountaineering boots, which she had left in the rear vestibule, sitting side by side on the worn planks directly in front of the main door. The door itself was still bolted, the deep snow outside unmarked. She wrote that the feeling was not one of immeasurable patience, and a quiet, insistent suggestion. Theories among those who have experienced these events are varied, but they share a common theme of inversion. Some suggest the shelter sits at a point where the glaciera's immense pressure has warped local gravity, creating a tiny pocket where the rules are subtly bent. The uphill water is a symptom. The cracking sounds are the ice straining under these unnatural forces. The moved boots, then, are a result of this gravitational slip, objects slowly sliding towards a point of altered pull. Others speak of mimicry. The glacier, they propose, is not an inert sheet of ice, but a slow, recording entity. Over millennia, it has absorbed the routines of the living things that traverse it. The migration patterns of caribou, the paths of early explorers, the daily rhythms of researchers. The glacier, in its own ancient way, reenacts these patterns. The uphill flow mirrors long-vanished underground springs. The cracking sounds echo the footsteps of lost expeditions. The moved boots are a replicated ritual, a frozen memory of someone, or something, always preparing to leave. The Glacier Run shelter remains in use. Its logbook is filled with precise scientific notations, temperature readings, and ice core data. But interspersed between the numbers are shorter, neater entries. Heard the cracks again at 0300. Confirmed the stream anomaly. Boots were at the door at dawn. The entries are never accompanied by exclamation points or wild speculation. They are recorded as simple facts, another set of data points in a landscape that remains deeply, fundamentally unknown. Of a landscape that remains deeply, fundamentally unknown. The shelter stands as an outpost not just against the cold, where water runs backward, Ice speaks in sharp tones, and the mountain itself seems to gently, patiently, encourage you to put on your boots and walk out into the whispering, frozen expanse. Deadfall Ridge Hut sits on a narrow rise where the forest has thinned just enough to reveal the damage of years of storms. Fallen trees surround the shelter in every direction. Trunks lie stacked at odd angles, their roots torn free and exposed to air. Branches overlap and tangle, forming a natural barrier that makes approach slow and deliberate. The hut was built to serve as a temporary refuge for forestry crews and hikers crossing the ridge. It is small, square, and solid, constructed from thick timbers reinforced with iron brackets. By daylight, it feels sturdy and unremarkable. The fallen trees appear dormant, frozen in place where they fell. Night changes the ridge. As darkness settles, the forest grows unnaturally quiet. Wind moves above the canopy but rarely reaches the ground. Wind moves above the canopy but rarely reaches the ground. The fallen trunks begin to creak loudly, their wood shifting and settling despite the absence of wind. The creaking does not follow temperature changes. It begins even on mild nights when the air remains stable. The sound travels through the pile of deadfall, moving from one side of the hut to the other, as if the trees are adjusting themselves incrementally. Inside the hut, the noise feels closer. The walls amplify the creaks, making them sound as though they originate just outside the structure. Visitors often pause mid-conversation, listening as the wood groans and settles again. The shadows appear. They show up pressed against the windows, dark shapes interrupting the faint light from inside. The shadows do not move immediately. They linger for seconds, sometimes longer, as if resting against the glass. No sound accompanies them. No breathing. No motion away from the glass. They are simply gone. Outside, the fallen trees remain exactly as before. Unmoving and silent. These appearances happen repeatedly through the night. They do not favor one window over another. Sometimes a single shadow appears. Other times, several windows darken at once, creating the impression that something has encircled the hut. Stepping out with a light reveals only fallen trunks and broken branches. No footprints appear in the soil. No disturbed leaves or snapped twigs indicate recent movement. The fallen trees themselves feel wrong. Their placement suggests natural collapse, yet many are angled toward the hut, as if drawn inward. Some trunks rest against others in ways that defy simple gravity, balanced too precisely to have landed by chance. The sound is heavy and deliberate, like wood bending under controlled force rather than random decay. The hut remains intact, but the pressure feels present, close enough to notice through the walls. Visitors describe a sense of compression. The air inside the hut feels thicker, as though space itself has narrowed. Movement becomes careful and measured. Even breathing feels louder in the quiet gaps between creaks. Sleep is difficult. Those who lie down often wake to the sound of wood settling nearby, followed by the sensation of being watched. The shadows return without warning, appearing at eye level or higher, pressed flat against the glass. Some report seeing hand-shaped impressions within the shadow. Not clear enough to define fingers, but suggestive enough to unsettle. These impressions never remain long enough to study. The shadows never enter. Doors stay closed. Windows remain intact. Nothing forces its way inside. The presence feels contained, as if limited to the boundary of glass and wood. Rangers are aware of the reports. Official explanations cite thermal movement in deadfall, natural settling, and light distortion caused by uneven illumination. These explanations account for some noise, but not the timing or repetition of the shadows. Equipment behaves normally inside the hut. Lights do not flicker. Radios function without interference. No temperature anomalies are recorded. The environment appears stable, making the experiences harder to explain. Local history adds context without clarity. Old logging records describe the ridge as unstable long before the hut was built. Trees fell frequently, even in calm weather. Crews avoided camping there overnight whenever possible, preferring to descend the ridge before dark. Some believe the fallen trees are not finished falling. They suggest the forest is slowly collapsing inward, adjusting itself around the hut. In this view, the creaking is not decay, but movement delayed over years rather than moments. Others believe the shadows are a byproduct of attention. They say the ridge reacts to presence, that the fallen wood presses closer when people remain too long. According to these stories, the shadows are not figures, but pressure made visible, a sign that the space is narrowing. Visitors who stay only briefly rarely notice anything unusual. Those who remain after sunset experience the full effect. The sounds, the shadows, the sense of enclosure. Many leave before morning, choosing to hike out in darkness rather than endure another night. By dawn, the ridge appears unchanged. Sunlight filters through the broken canopy. Fallen trees rest where they always have. The hut stands clear of shadows, its windows reflecting forest and sky. The creaking stops completely. No marks remain on the glass. No signs show where shadows pressed moments earlier. The forest offers no evidence of movement or disturbance. Those who leave carry the memory with them. They recall the sound of wood shifting without wind. The sudden dark shapes against the windows. The way the forest seemed closer at night than it should be. Deadfall Ridge Hut continues to stand among the fallen trees. It offers shelter as intended, protection from rain and cold. During the day, it is a simple structure in a damaged forest. At night, the ridge settles around it. Wood creaks as pressure shifts. Shadows test the boundary of light. Nothing enters, nothing speaks, nothing leaves behind proof. The hut remains, surrounded by fallen trees that no longer fall. Waiting quietly for the next night, when the forest presses inward again. And reminds visitors that collapse does not always finish at the moment of impact. White Silence Shelter stands on a wide plateau where snow lingers even in warmer months. The land is open and pale, stretching outward with few landmarks to guide the eye. The shelter was built as a refuge for travelers crossing this exposed region, a simple structure meant to offer rest and protection from sudden weather. Yet the moment visitors step inside, something fundamental changes. Sound disappears. Not gradually. Not unevenly. It is simply gone. Footsteps make no echo. Clothing does not rustle. Even breathing feels muted, as if the air itself absorbs vibration. Visitors instinctively speak louder, testing the space, but their voices feel swallowed before they travel more than a short distance. Words leave the mouth and vanish, failing to return as sound. At first, the silence feels peaceful. A relief from wind and exposure. People smile, exchange glances, nodding as if sharing a quiet joke. But the absence deepens quickly, becoming heavy rather than calm. Ears begin to ring. The sound is high and constant, filling the void left by everything else. The shelter seems to press inward. Walls feel closer. The ceiling lower. Movements become careful, restrained, as if sudden motion might disturb something unseen. The silence is not empty. It feels occupied. Visitors report an immediate sense of dread that has no obvious cause. Nothing moves. Nothing threatens. Yet the body reacts as if danger is near. Heart rates rise. Hands tremble slightly. The instinct to leave grows stronger with each passing minute. Attempts to communicate become frustrating. Voices still work, but the lack of audible feedback creates disorientation. They rely on facial expressions and gestures, which feel inadequate in the blank space. People cannot hear themselves clearly. They are small and insignificant. Cold, cosmic color palette of deep blues, purples, and eerie greens. A sense of impending doom and madness. Some visitors step back outside, expecting relief. The wind returns. Sound behaves normally again. But when they re-enter the shelter, the silence resumes instantly, seamless and complete. The ringing grows louder with time. Staying too long leads to dizziness. Thoughts feel distant, as if filtered. Concentration slips away. Simple decisions take effort. A sense of being observed creeps in, not from a specific direction, but from the space itself. Many leave early. They pack quickly, eager to hear the sound of wind again, even if it is harsh. Some abandon planned rest stops entirely, choosing to push on through difficult conditions rather than remain inside. Those who stay overnight experience a deeper effect. As night falls, the silence thickens further. Lantern light feels dimmer, though brightness has not changed. Shadows lose definition, blending softly into walls and corners. The ringing in the ears becomes layered, pulsing slightly, as if responding to the stillness. Sleep is difficult. Without sound, time loses structure. Dreams come quickly and end abruptly. Waking feels disorienting, as if the mind struggles to reattach to the body. Some report waking suddenly with the certainty that something has shifted, though nothing appears different. No footsteps are heard. No doors creak. No wind presses against the walls. The shelter exists in isolation from the world of noise. Morning brings little change. Daylight enters through narrow windows, but the silence remains intact. Voices still fail to carry. The ringing persists until the moment one steps outside. Studies have attempted to explain the phenomenon. Acoustic engineers suggest the shelter's materials and shape may cancel sound waves unusually well. Yet tests show no configuration capable of producing such complete absorption across all frequencies. Medical professionals note that extreme silence can affect perception, increasing anxiety and internal noise. But this does not explain the immediacy of the effect, or the way different visitors report nearly identical sensations. Maintenance crews tasked with inspecting the shelter do their work quickly. They speak outside before entering, agreeing on tasks in advance. Inside, they rely on hand signals. None choose to linger. The shelter shows no signs of decay beyond what weather would cause. No hidden insulation. No unusual structures within the walls. It remains a functional building, solid and dependable in every measurable way. And yet, it empties itself of sound. Travelers who return months later often hesitate before entering again. Some stand at the threshold, listening to the wind, reluctant to cross into the quiet. Others step inside briefly, only to retreat moments later, unsettled by how quickly the silence closes around them. Stories about White Silence shelter spread quietly, passed between hikers, researchers, and guides. They are told without embellishment. No one claims harm came to them. They simply say the place asks something of you, and not everyone is willing to give it. The shelter remains open. No warnings are posted. No restrictions are placed on its use. On maps, it is marked like any other refuge, an unremarkable dot in a wide, pale expanse. But those who have stood inside know the difference. They remember the way sound vanished, how their own voices felt distant, how dread arrived without explanation. They remember leaving early, relieved to hear the world again. White Silence shelter continues to stand against wind and snow, offering protection from the elements. Inside, it offers something else entirely. A reminder of how loud the world truly is, and how unsettling it can be when that noise is taken away. Blue Needle Cabin rests deep within a high pine forest where the ground is thick with fallen needles and the air carries a constant scent of resin and cold earth. The structure was built as a seasonal retreat, simple and functional, intended to shelter forestry workers during long rotations far from towns or marked roads. From a distance, the cabin blends easily into the landscape, its weathered wood nearly matching the surrounding trunks. What sets the area apart reveals itself only after nightfall. As daylight fades, the forest floor around the cabin begins to change. Pine needles scattered across the ground emit a faint blue glow, subtle at first, barely visible unless the eyes adjust to the dark. The light does not pulse or spread. Each needle glows individually, like a field of quiet stars pressed into the soil. Visitors often assume the effect comes from moisture or minerals, perhaps a natural reaction under certain conditions. Yet the glow appears regardless of weather. Dry nights, wet nights, clear skies, cloud cover. The needles shine all the same, outlining paths and tree roots with delicate precision. Standing at the edge of this light creates an unusual contrast, a clear boundary between the known space near the cabin and the deeper forest beyond. It is within that darker perimeter that figures are first noticed. They appear as tall shapes standing between the trees, darker than the darkness around them. They do not move. They do not approach. Their outlines are indistinct, as if made of shadow rather than substance. Only when looked at twice does the difference become clear. Those who see the figures describe an immediate sense of awareness. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. A feeling that something is present that was not there before, and that it is paying attention. Approaching the figures produces a consistent result. As distance closes, the shapes begin to thin and lose definition. Their centers fade. By the time a person reaches the spot where a figure stood, there is nothing left but trees and darkness. Turning back toward the cabin reveals the blue needles glowing steadily, unchanged by what has just occurred. The forest offers no sign that anything unusual took place. People who remain near the cabin overnight report heightened sensitivity to the surrounding space. Sound seems sharper. The crack of a settling branch feels closer than it should. Wind through the canopy carries a low, whispering quality that never forms words, yet feels deliberate. Inside the cabin, light from lamps spills through windows and onto the glowing needles outside, creating overlapping hues of yellow and blue. The effect is calming for some, deeply unsettling for others. Sleep comes in fragments. Dreams are vivid and heavy with imagery of standing forests and distant watchers. Several individuals have reported waking during the night with the certainty that someone is standing just beyond the window. Curtains drawn aside reveal only the glowing forest floor and the familiar shapes of trees. No movement. No figures. Yet the feeling lingers long after. Those who step outside during the night often notice more figures than before. They stand farther back, just beyond the reach of the blue glow. Their number varies, sometimes only one or two, sometimes many, spaced evenly as if positioned with intention. Despite their presence, there is no sense of threat. The glowing needles clearly, their blue light vivid against the dark ground. The figures, however, appear only as vague distortions or are absent entirely. Attempts to document the phenomenon have produced limited results. The figures do not advance. They do not block paths or surround the cabin. They simply observe, holding their positions with patient stillness. Forest officials acknowledge reports but offer no explanation. The area shows no signs of chemical contamination or unusual plant life beyond the glowing needles. Wildlife surveys indicate normal populations, though animals are rarely seen near the cabin at night. Local accounts add another layer. Long before the cabin was built, the area was avoided after sunset. Hunters spoke of lights on the ground that marked places where one should not linger. Elders warned that the forest there watched back, not with malice, but with expectation. According to these stories, the figures are not visitors. They are markers. Signs of presence rather than presence itself. They appear to those who notice the glow, to those who pause long enough to be aware of the forest as more than background. Those who leave the cabin before dawn often describe relief mixed with reluctance. The blue glow fades with the rising sun. The needles return to their ordinary brown. The forest resumes familiar sounds. Birds call. Insects stir. The sense of observation dissolves as daylight asserts itself. Yet the memory remains unusually strong. Many who have stayed at Blue Needle Cabin find themselves thinking about it long afterward. Not with fear, but with curiosity. A sense that something was encountered, even if it cannot be clearly defined. The cabin continues to stand, maintained and occasionally occupied. It offers shelter, warmth, and safety from the elements. Nothing within it is dangerous. The forest does not act. It waits. Those who respect the space, who observe without chasing what fades away, leave unchanged. Those who try to force understanding, who push beyond the blue glow into the deeper dark, often return unsettled, carrying questions that never quite resolve. At night, when the pine needles glow softly and the figures stand among the trees, Blue Needle Cabin becomes less a place of rest and more a quiet meeting point. A place where the forest allows itself to be seen, briefly, before withdrawing once again into shadow. Perched on a windswept ridge in the eastern Ozarks stands a small stone structure known as Storm Rest Shelter. It was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps as a refuge for hikers caught in sudden mountain storms. Sturdy walls. A fireproof roof. A heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. Yet over the decades it has earned a quiet reputation not for safety but for strangeness. The shelter sits exposed on a granite outcrop where weather systems collide with unusual frequency. Storms gather here faster than surrounding areas. Clouds boil upward in swirling towers. And lightning more than anywhere else in the region strikes with startling precision. But repeatedly within a tight radius around the shelter itself. Forestry Service records show over 70 confirmed strikes within 200 feet of the structure in the last 40 years. Several have hit the same boulder just east of the entrance 3 times in a single season. None have damaged the shelter. The stone absorbs the energy. The iron door hums faintly. Of ozone and wet stone. For several minutes. It is during these storms that visitors report the most unsettling phenomenon. Amid the roar of thunder a different sound emerges. Brief. Sudden. Human. A cry. Not a shout of pain but a sharp inhalation. Sometimes layered beneath the thunderclap. Sometimes echoing just after it fades. Multiple independent accounts describe it as unmistakable. Not imagined. Not mistaken for wind. The sound of a voice caught in the instant before silence. No recordings have captured it cleanly. Audio files show only the expected acoustic profile of thunder. Yet witnesses as seasoned rangers, researchers and experienced outdoorspeople describe the same detail. The cry is never repeated. Never prolonged. And always seems to come from just outside the door. Some believe the shelter sits atop an older site. Local archives mention a small homestead that vanished in a flash flood and lightning strike in 1898. 3 members of one family were lost. Their names appear on a weathered marker down in the valley, but no graves were ever recovered. The CCC crew who built the shelter found fragments of burnt timber and a single iron stove leg fused to bedrock during excavation. They did not remove it. they built around it. Geologists note that the ridge contains high concentrations of quartz and conductive minerals. When struck by lightning, the ground can store and slowly release residual electrical inertia, a phenomenon called fulgurite resonance. In rare cases, this energy interacts with moist air to create brief plasma discharges or acoustic anomalies. Some scientists suggest these micro-events might stimulate the auditory cortex, producing the perception of sudden sharp sounds. A plausible explanation. Yet it does not account for why the phenomenon occurs almost exclusively here. Or why the sound is consistently described as human. Those who stay through a storm often leave before dawn. Not in fear but in quiet reflection. They speak of a weight in the air. A sense of witness. Not malice. Not sorrow. Just presence. One forest technician who monitored the shelter for a week during storm season wrote in her log that after each strike she felt compelled to open the door. Not to look out. Just to stand in the threshold. As if someone had knocked. Animals behave unusually near the site. Crows avoid the ridge during storms. Deer approach the tree line but do not enter the clearing. Even insects fall silent in the minutes before a strike. The shelter itself remains undamaged. Moss grows slowly on its north wall. Lichen patterns trace faint spirals across the stones. And the iron door, though never located, always closes firmly on its own when the wind rises. Storm rest shelter does not repel storms. It receives them. It does not silence thunder. It listens. And in that listening something else is heard. Not a warning. Not a plea. But a moment of recognition. A reminder that some events leave imprints not in stone or soil but in the air itself. In the space between flash and sound. Perhaps the cries are echoes of old lightning. Or perhaps the land remembers what the sky forgets. What is certain is this. When the clouds gather and the first distant rumble rolls across the hills, most hikers choose another path. But a few still climb the ridge. Light a small fire. Sit with their backs to the stone. And wait. Not for the storm to pass. But for the moment it speaks. Deep within the granite shield mountains, where the wind scours the rock into smooth, lonely shapes, lies the crossing known as Frostbite Pass. It is a narrow, treacherous defile, a place where winter arrives early and departs late. Guarding the approach to this pass is a small, square hut built from stone and stubbornness. For over a century, it has offered a last-chance respite for trappers, climbers, and the occasional foolhardy adventurer before they attempt the brutal final ascent. The hut has witnessed countless storms and countless close calls. But its reputation is built on more than just shelter from the wind. Those who spend a night within its cold stone walls report a specific and unsettling sensation. It begins as a deep chill, which is to be expected. But this chill evolves into something distinct. People inside feel sudden numbness. Not the gradual numbing of cold extremities, but an abrupt, localized loss of feeling. A cheek pressed against the inner wall might lose all feeling for minutes at a time. The numbness comes in waves, silent and sharp, receding as unexpectedly as it arrives. It feels less like the cold of the environment, and more like the cold of something else passing very, very close. The Huda's logbook is a ledger of endurance, but also of confusion. Many entries mention this phenomenon, often dismissed as early frostbite or fatigue. The entries become more focused, however, on what is found outside. The morning after a night of these strange numbness attacks, when the storm has settled and the world is blanketed in pristine snow, footprints appear. They are not the prints of the shelter's occupants. They are found in fresh snow leading nowhere. The prints are human in shape, but often slightly off. The stride is too long, or the impression is too shallow, as if the maker weighed almost nothing. They emerge from the tree line, or sometimes from the base of the cliff face itself, and march in a straight, deliberate line toward the hut. They stop a few feet from the heavy wooden door. There is no set of prints leading away. It is as if someone walked out of the wilderness, stood at the threshold, and then simply vanished into the air. On windless days, these solitary tracks remain, a perfect, unanswered question pressed into the snow. One account from a solo backpacker named Leo Chen is particularly noted. He reported waves of numbness so severe he dropped his mug of tea, his fingers refusing to acknowledge the heat. That night, he heard what he thought was wind, but which sounded, he wrote, like whispering through a keyhole. In the morning, he found not one set of prints, but dozens, all identical. They formed a perfect circle around the hut. A thoroughfare of something that had paced relentlessly around his refuge all night long. The circle was unbroken, with no tracks leading to or from its perimeter. Search and rescue teams are familiar with the Huda's eccentricities. They consider it a reliable shelter, but they have a standing protocol. No one stays there alone if it can be avoided. The official explanation is a combination of high-altitude effects, psychological isolation, and a natural geothermal oddity. Some point to faint, ancient methane seeps from the rock beneath the hut, which could cause minor nerve effects and lightheadedness, leading to hallucinations. The footprints are attributed to a unique wind pattern that sculpts the snow, or the meltanrefreeze pattern of sun on specific slopes. Yet, the oldest stories from the region, told by the few indigenous peoples who traversed these high passes, speak of the cold ones. These were not malevolent spirits, but presences of pure absence, entities of the deep freeze that existed before life. They were said to be curious about warmth, about the flickering heat of a fire and the pulse of living blood. They would draw close to feel it, and their proximity would steal sensation, leaving numbness in their wake. Their passage left marks on the world, but they themselves were not of it. Hence footprints that began and ended in stillness. The Frostbite Pass hut still stands. It is stocked with firewood and emergency supplies. Those who use it are grateful for its solid walls against the screaming gales. But they often report a specific ritual that has emerged among experienced mountaineers. Before bed, they will often place their boots not just by the door, but blocking it, laces tied together. It is a practical measure in high wind, they say. But it also serves another purpose. In the deep silence of the night, when a sudden, localized cold seeps into a sleeping form and a limb goes inexplicably dead. A limb goes inexplicably dead. The sight of those boots holding the door shut provides a small, irrational comfort. It is a reminder that some thresholds, marked by footprints in the snow that go nowhere, are best left uncrossed. The hut protects from the storm, but its true function may be as a barrier. A tiny outpost of warmth holding vigil against the ancient, curious cold that walks the pass outside. Alpine cabin sits deep within a stand of old evergreens where sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor. The trees grow close together here, their branches interlocking overhead and casting the ground in near-permanent shade. Even during midday, the light feels muted, filtered through layers of needles and shadow. The cabin was built decades ago as a seasonal retreat, simple and isolated by design. Rough timber walls, narrow windows, and a single door facing the trail. From the outside, it appears quiet and well kept, though no one can remember the last time it was occupied for more than a single night. The first thing visitors notice is the stillness. Wind moves through the upper canopy, but barely touches the ground. Birds avoid the immediate area. Sound seems absorbed by the trees, leaving the cabin wrapped in an unnatural calm. Footsteps feel louder than they should, echoing briefly before vanishing. Inside, the cabin feels colder than expected. The air is dry and carries the scent of pine resin and aged wood. Light enters through the windows in thin bands, stretching across the floor and walls. At first, everything appears normal, though the shadows seem heavier, darker than those cast elsewhere in the forest. The shadows here move independently of light. Visitors often notice it by accident. A shadow along the wall shifts, despite no change in sunlight or movement in the room. A dark shape stretches, then retracts, as if adjusting its position. Lamps remain steady. Windows remain unchanged. Yet the shadows continue to drift. At first, people assume fatigue or imagination. Long travel, isolation, and low light can affect perception. Most shrug it off, continuing to unpack or settle in. It is only when the movement repeats that unease begins to set in. Silhouettes cross the walls. They move slowly, deliberately, passing from one corner of the room to another. The shapes are tall and narrow, human in outline but lacking detail. They do not reflect any physical presence. No one stands between the light source and the wall. The silhouettes simply pass through, uninterrupted. There are no footsteps, no brushing against wood. The cabin remains silent as the shapes move, their presence marked only by the shifting absence of light. Attempts to follow the silhouettes lead nowhere. Turning toward the source reveals empty space. The shadows vanish when approached, only to reappear moments later on a different surface. They do not respond to attention. They behave as if unaware of being observed. As evening approaches, the effect intensifies. Natural light fades, replaced by lamps and firelight. Shadows should shorten and soften. Instead, they lengthen. They stretch across walls and ceilings in ways that do not align with any visible object. The cabin begins to feel occupied by more than furniture and air. No one stays longer than one night. This is not due to panic or immediate danger. It is a gradual realization that the space is not meant to be shared. Visitors describe a growing sense of displacement, as if the cabin is not rejecting them, but ignoring them entirely. Sleep proves nearly impossible. Dreams are shallow and fragmented, interrupted by the feeling of being watched without direction. Some wake to find shadows gathered near the bed. They do not touch. They do not reach. They simply linger, pressed against the walls, elongated and still. The moment a light is turned on, the shapes disperse, retreating into corners where they no longer belong. Morning brings little relief. Daylight returns, but the shadows remain darker than expected. The forest outside remains quiet, unchanged. Visitors leave quickly. They pack without ceremony, driven by the need to be elsewhere rather than fear. The forest feels lighter immediately, as if weight has been lifted with distance. No physical evidence remains. The cabin shows no damage. Walls are unmarked. Floors are clean. There are no signs of intrusion or decay. Photographs taken inside rarely capture anything unusual. The silhouettes do not appear on camera, leaving only normal shadow patterns behind. Local accounts of Alpine cabin are brief and cautious. No dramatic stories are shared openly. People simply state that it is not a place to linger. Those who have stayed the night rarely volunteer details, offering only that it felt wrong to remain. Some believe the cabin was built in a place where light behaves differently. They suggest the dense forest creates layers of shadow that overlap in unusual ways, confusing perception. Others believe the cabin interrupts something older, something that does not rely on light to exist. A few say the shadows are not entities, but absences. They describe them as places where light fails to settle, where space itself bends inward slightly. According to this view, the silhouettes are not moving toward anything, but away from something unseen. Rangers avoid assigning overnight duties there. Maintenance is performed during daylight hours only. Repairs are completed quickly. No one volunteers to stay past dusk. The cabin remains officially available, though rarely requested. Those who visit during the day often feel nothing unusual. The cabin appears ordinary. The forest is calm. Shadows behave as expected. Only when night approaches does the atmosphere shift, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Alpine cabin does not trap or threaten. It does not lock doors or block exits. It does not produce sound or force interaction. It simply exists in a way that makes human presence feel temporary and unnecessary. Those who leave carry a lasting impression. They notice shadows differently afterward, watching how they move and settle. Some report discomfort in dimly lit rooms for weeks, as if expecting movement where none occurs. The cabin remains where it is, unchanged. Trees continue to grow around it. The trail remains passable. From the outside, nothing warns of what happens within. Only experience teaches restraint. By night, its walls host movement without source, silhouettes without bodies, shadows that do not obey light. No one stays longer than one night. And those who leave understand without explanation that the cabin does not need occupants to feel full. Broken Compass Shelter sits in a shallow basin between low ridges, far from marked trails and reliable landmarks. The land around it looks uniform from every direction, a spread of rock, scrub, and pale soil that offers little guidance to travelers. The shelter was built decades ago as a navigational rest point, a place where hikers could stop, orient themselves, and continue with confidence. Orientation is the one thing that fails here. Visitors often notice it the moment they arrive. Compasses begin to behave strangely within a short distance of the hut. Needles hesitate. They twitch, then spin, circling without settling. Digital navigation devices struggle as well, recalculating repeatedly, pointing nowhere with certainty. Stepping farther away does not always fix the issue. Sometimes the disruption follows the traveler for several minutes before fading. At first, the malfunction feels like an inconvenience. A curiosity. Many assume local mineral deposits are interfering with magnetic readings. The explanation seems reasonable enough, and most decide to rest inside the shelter before moving on. That decision is where time begins to lose its shape. Broken Compass Shelter is plain and functional. Thick walls. A low roof. Small windows positioned to block wind rather than offer views. Inside, the light feels dimmer than expected, even during the day. Shadows linger in corners longer than they should, softening the edges of the room. People sit down, intending to pause briefly. A drink of water. A snack. A moment to check maps and plan the next leg of the journey. Conversation flows easily at first. Then gradually slows. The sense of urgency that usually accompanies travel fades. Replaced by a gentle, almost heavy calm. Time stretches. Clocks behave inconsistently. Wristwatches run slow, then fast. Some stop entirely, only to restart later without explanation. Phones display different times depending on the app being used. A few minutes glance at the screen turns into something longer, though it is difficult to say how long. The shelter feels insulated from the outside world, not just from weather, but from sequence. Events inside seem detached from before and after. Thoughts drift. Plans feel distant and unnecessary. Then there are the missing hours. Groups enter the shelter expecting a short break. And leave to find the sun far lower than anticipated. Shadows outside have shifted dramatically. The air has cooled. What should have been minutes has become hours without any clear memory of how that time passed. No one recalls sleeping. There are no gaps filled with dreams or rest. Instead, there is a smooth absence, a sense that time simply slid by without registering. Conversations feel unfinished. Food remains partially eaten. Pages in notebooks show only the beginnings of thoughts. Those who compare experiences often find their memories do not align. One person recalls sitting near the door. Another remembers them across the room. Discussions about the break reveal inconsistencies that cannot be easily resolved. Leaving the shelter brings a subtle jolt, like stepping onto uneven ground after standing still too long. The outside world feels louder, sharper. Movement feels more urgent. Some experience mild headaches or fatigue that fades gradually as they walk away. Compasses begin to stabilize once distance is gained. Needles settle, though they may take time to behave normally. Authorities have investigated broken compass shelter multiple times. Geological surveys show nothing unusual beneath the site that would explain prolonged magnetic disruption. No electrical sources are present. No structural features account for the altered perception of time. Weather data offers no clues. The effect does not correlate with storms, solar activity, or temperature shifts. It occurs quietly, without warning. Local guides advise visitors to limit their time inside. They suggest setting alarms, keeping movement frequent, and checking in with one another regularly. Even with precautions, some still lose track of time. The shelter has not been closed. It remains structurally sound and serves its original purpose in emergencies. Most who pass through experience nothing more than faulty compasses and a strange sense of calm. Others leave unsettled. They struggle to explain what was lost, only that something slipped past unnoticed. Hours that should exist but do not. A pause in the journey that feels larger than it should. Returning visitors sometimes avoid going inside again. They rest outside instead, keeping the shelter in sight but not entering. They say it feels safer to let time move naturally, even if conditions are harsh. The structure waits, offering rest and disorientation in equal measure. For those who enter, the experience often feels gentle rather than threatening. There is no panic, no sudden fear. Just a subtle unmooring, a reminder that direction and time are not as fixed as they seem. When travelers finally move on, they do so with a renewed awareness of each step, each minute. They check their bearings more often. They mark time carefully. Because once you realize how easily hours can disappear, every moment afterward feels fragile. And every pause carries the quiet question of how much time it will take before you notice it is gone. Howling Ridge Shelter sits near the crest of a long, exposed ridge where the land rises above the surrounding valleys and meets the open sky. The shelter was built to withstand harsh conditions, anchored into stone and reinforced against storms that roll through without warning. From a distance, it appears solid and dependable, a necessary refuge in a place shaped by wind. The wind is constant here. It moves across the ridge day and night, sliding over rock and scrub, pushing against the shelter's walls with steady force. Even on clear days, there is always sound. A low, unbroken howl that never fully fades, never fully rises, like the breath of the mountain itself. Visitors learn quickly that silence does not exist at Howling Ridge. The wind fills every pause. It slips through cracks, rattles loose fittings, and hums across the roof. At first, the noise is simply loud. Over time, it becomes something more difficult to separate from thought. The shelter stands near the highest point of the ridge, with steep slopes falling away on both sides. Trails approach from below, winding upward through thinning trees until the landscape opens into rock and sky. The higher one climbs, the stronger the wind feels, pressing against the body as if testing resolve. Most hikers arrive tired and grateful for cover. Inside, the shelter offers protection, but not quiet. The walls block rain and cold, yet the wind remains present, amplified in strange ways as it moves around the structure. It is during the night that the wind begins to change. Those staying overnight often report moments when the sound shifts subtly, briefly forming patterns that resemble distant voices. A rise and fall that sounds almost like speech. A break in the howl that feels shaped rather than random. The distinction between wind and voice becomes harder to maintain. Some describe hearing what sounds like someone calling out from beyond the shelter, faint and strained, carried on the wind from somewhere down the ridge. The calls do not repeat clearly. They do not repeat clearly. Yet the impression is strong enough to stir concern. A sense that someone is out there, exposed, struggling against the same relentless wind. Those who step outside to investigate find only darkness and motion. The wind surges without direction, wrapping around the body and pulling at clothing. No footprints mark the ground. Returning inside does not always bring relief. The sound continues, now harder to ignore. Once the idea of voices has taken hold, the wind seems to lean into it, shaping itself into cries that feel closer, more urgent. The shelter's walls vibrate faintly, carrying the noise directly into the space meant for rest. Search and rescue teams have documented incidents linked to Howling Ridge Shelter. Well-meaning visitors responding to perceived calls have ventured out into dangerous terrain, convinced someone needed help. In every case, the result was the same. No one was found. Daylight inspections of the surrounding area reveal nothing unusual. No hidden ravines that could amplify sound unnaturally. No structures that could create echoes with such precision. Meteorological explanations account for much of the wind behavior. But not the emotional clarity reported by those who hear the voices. Veteran hikers offer quiet advice. Do not try to interpret the wind. Do not answer it. Treat every sound as weather, no matter how convincing it feels. Those who follow this guidance tend to sleep better, or at least remain inside. One former caretaker spent several seasons maintaining the shelter. He described the wind as having moods. Some nights it roared without variation. Other nights it seemed to pause, as if listening. Before rising again with renewed intensity. He never claimed to hear voices, but admitted that the wind often sounded disappointed when ignored. Historical records suggest the ridge has long been known for its sound. Early travelers avoided camping near the crest, choosing lower ground where the wind broke against trees. Notes from old trail journals mention unsettling nights and restless sleep, though no clear cause was recorded. Modern audio equipment has been used to study the phenomenon. Recordings capture the full range of wind noise, from low rumbles to sharp whistles. When played back, some listeners insist they hear voices within the sound, while others hear nothing but air and movement. Interpretation varies widely. Psychologists suggest that isolation, fatigue, and constant noise can push the brain to impose structure where none exists. The explanation fits neatly, yet it does not explain why the cries often feel directional, as if coming from specific points along the ridge. Those who leave Howling Ridge Shelter in the morning often feel drained. Sleep is shallow here. The wind presses against the mind as much as the body. Descending the trail brings gradual relief as trees return and the sound breaks apart into something less insistent. Looking back from lower ground, the ridge appears peaceful, even beautiful. The shelter stands firm against the sky, unchanged by the night. The wind continues to move across the crest, indifferent to those who pass through. Howling Ridge Shelter remains open and in use, serving its purpose faithfully. It offers protection from the elements, a place to endure rather than relax. The wind will always howl there. That is its nature. Whether the voices are imagined or something more subtle does not change the outcome. Those who respond find nothing waiting for them. Only the wind, moving endlessly across the ridge, shaping sound into forms that feel meaningful, then dissolving them back into noise as if they were never there at all. High in the remote Brooks Range of northern Alaska stands a small trapper-s cabin. Known to bush pilots and winter surveyors as Everdark Hut. It is not abandoned. Not dilapidated. The walls are tight. The roof sealed against the wind. Supplies remain stakita canned goods, fuel, spare wixa. Left by previous visitors in a quiet tradition of backcountry courtesy. Yet despite its practicality few choose to stay after nightfall. Not because of cold or isolation. But because of the dark. Inside the hut darkness does not simply fall. It settles. It settles. Thick. Heavy. Like a physical presence pressing gently but insistently against the skin. Even with daylight streaming through the single double-paned window. The interior feels dimmer than it should. Shadows pool in the corners not receding fully when the sun is high. And as twilight approaches the effect intensifies. The air seems to thicken. Breathing becomes slightly more deliberate. A subtle weight forms in the chest. Not pain. Not suffocation. Just resistance. As if the space itself is holding its breath. Lights fail here with unsettling regularity. Not due to faulty wiring or dead batteries. Lanterns sputter and dim even with fresh fuel. Headlamps flicker then go dark for 10 or 20 seconds before returning. Flashlights aimed at the walls cast weak halos that shrink rather than expand. One geologist documented over 30 light failures during a single 6-hour stay. Each time the darkness returned it felt deeper. More complete. As if the absence of light were accumulating. Most unsettling is the emotional shift that follows. A sudden wave of urgency. Not terror. Not hallucination. But a clear unmistakable instinct to leave. Now. This feeling does not build gradually. It arrives fully formed. Rational thought remains intact. Yet the body responds as if danger is immediate and undeniable. Several experienced outdoors people have described strapping on snowshoes in under a minute. Zipping their parkas with numb fingers. Stepping out into -30-degree air without pause. Only later do they question why they fled into the very cold they had sought shelter from. No one has been injured at Everdark Hut. Thermal imaging shows even heat distribution. Air quality tests reveal nothing unusual. Yet the pattern holds. Those who spend the night almost always leave before dawn. Some return days later. As if they had broken an unspoken agreement. Local trappers speak of the hut in measured tones. Not with superstition but with observation. One elder noted that animals avoid the clearing entirely. Ptarmigan circle overhead but do not land. Wolves pass the tree line but do not enter. Even insects are absent in summer months. He suggested the hut may sit atop an ancient air pocket trapped in permafrost, a void so old and sealed it holds a different kind of stillness. A stillness that does not welcome intrusion. Scientists have proposed several theories. The region's high geomagnetic activity may interfere with human bioelectrical signals, particularly in confined spaces. Infrasound from wind moving through subglacial channels could trigger subconscious stress responses. Or the dense spruce surrounding the hut may absorb ambient light and sound in ways that amplify sensory deprivation. All are plausible. All remain unproven. What is documented is this. The panic does not escalate. It does not distort perception. It simply urges departure. And those who listen often report relief the moment they cross the threshold. A lightening of the chest. A return of calm clarity. As if the land outside welcomes them back. Some visitors now prepare differently. They bring multiple light sources. They limit stays to daylight hours. A few leave small tokens on the Scylla, a carved antler piece, a smooth river stonia, as a gesture of respect. None have been moved. None disturbed. Everdark hut does not threaten. It asserts. It reminds those who enter that some spaces are not empty. They are occupied. Not by spirits or forces but by quiet. By depth. By a darkness so complete it becomes its own kind of presence. Perhaps the panic is not a reaction to danger. But an ancient instinct recognizing a boundary. A threshold between the world of light and motion and something older. Deeper. Patient. The hut remains. The darkness holds. And each winter when the snow deepens and the sun barely clears the ridge, the door stays closed. Not locked. Just waiting. The last summit shelter occupies a realm of rock and sky. Built from aluminum and reinforced glass to withstand hurricane-force winds. It resembles a satellite that has fallen to Earth. This shelter lies near the highest trails, a lonely sentinel at the edge of the habitable world. Its purpose was clear, a life-saving box of oxygen and warmth. But for years now, no official climbing registries have listed it as a planned stopover. The most experienced guides bypass it. And yet, if you ask about it in the lodges below, you will hear a consistent, unsettling refrain. The shelter is rarely empty. Someone, or something, is using it. The evidence comes from those who have camped on the ridge within sight of its angular silhouette. On nights of profound stillness, when the stars are sharp enough to cut glass and the wind has died to nothing. The lights turn on by themselves. There is no pattern to it. No timer, no sensor that could explain the illumination. Climbers in their own tents report watching the structure sit dark for hours. Only to see its windows suddenly bloom with light at midnight. Or 3 in the morning. It burns for a while, sometimes an hour, sometimes just minutes. And then just as abruptly, it winks out. Returning to the darkness of the mountain. More unsettling is the matter of the door. It is a heavy, vault-like hatch designed to seal against blizzards. Multiple accounts from credible alpinists describe the same phenomenon. During these perfectly calm nights, the door opens. Not from a violent gust, for there is no wind. It simply unseals and swings outward on its hinges, a black rectangle opening to the void. It remains open for a variable period, perhaps letting the cold in, or perhaps letting something out. Then, slowly, it swings shut again, the airtight seal clicking back into place with a sound that carries clearly in the thin, silent air. One documented expedition, a team studying high-altitude atmospheric pressure, decided to use the shelter as a temporary instrument station. They found it impeccably clean, the bunk mats neat, the emergency supplies fully stocked and untouched, as if awaiting its next official visitors. Their equipment recorded nothing unusual. But on their third night, the team leader, awake to check readings, witnessed the event firsthand. The interior lights ignited, illuminating the empty space. Then, the door's status indicator on his panel changed from locked to open. He watched through his tent flap as the heavy door swung out into the night. He saw nothing pass through it. 20 minutes later. It closed again, and the lights extinguished. In his official report, he logged it as a probable malfunction of the automated pressure equalization system, though he privately noted the shelter had no such system. The obvious question hangs in the thin air. No one knows who uses it now. The shelter is too remote for casual visitation, and the mountain's challenges filter out all but the most determined. There are no footprints leading to it on calm mornings, no signs of occupation beyond the elusive lights and the moving door. Speculation among the climbing community is varied. Some believe it is the ritual of a ghost, a fallen climber forever repeating the final steps of seeking shelter. Others suggest a more pragmatic, yet stranger idea. They propose that the shelter itself, subjected to extreme temperature swings and the subtle flexing of the mountain, has developed a kind of memory. It replays the actions of past inhabitants, the universal routine of someone arriving, turning on the light, opening the door to look at the view, and then settling in for the night. There is a third, more contemplative theory. The last summit shelter exists in a space so harsh, so removed from the world below, that it has become a neutral ground. A place where the mountain's own ancient presence, whatever form that may take, has grown accustomed to the strange, warm box on its shoulder. The lights turning on and the door opening are not malfunctions, nor echoes, but a form of occupation. A claiming, airing it out, and looking down from the highest trails at the sleeping world below. The shelter remains on all the maps. Its coordinates are a potential safe haven for anyone in true, desperate peril on the peak. But a quiet understanding has emerged. You may approach it if your life depends on it. You may even dare to enter. But if you find it empty, and you choose to stay, you are a guest. And you should not be surprised if, in the deep silence of the night, the lights come on to welcome you. Or the door opens to show you the vast, star-filled void, reminding you of just how small, and how temporary, a visitor you really are. Thank you for journeying with me into the haunted alpine forest shelters of Colorado. These places were built to protect the lost and the cold. But the mountains decide who stays and who leaves. The forest remembers every step taken beneath its trees, every breath taken in the thin air, every soul that sought shelter and never returned. If you ever find yourself hiking high in the Colorado Rockies, and night begins to fall, choose your shelter carefully. If you hear knocking in the storm, think twice before answering. If shadows move beyond the firelight, do not follow them. And if the forest grows suddenly silent, trust your instincts. Rest well tonight, my friend. And may the mountains let you pass unseen.